Well, thanks again. Thanks for coming back. It's a real delight actually to move to this second part of our webinar because we've got some great people who've been listening and thinking about the research that we've been hearing about. So we had a fantastic presentations by the research groups that we're funding from Nuffield, but we thought it'd be wonderful if we can hear from the perspective of people who've got experience with the issues on the ground, as it were. I'm here, actually my background is actually I'm a quantum physicist, given now you probably know what quantum is now. I didn't many years ago. But the reason why this is so important to me, I should say, is I come from a family of industrialists in South Wales. My father ran the Rhondda Group Training Association, and my father-in-law was principally responsible for the construction parts of the amalgam works in Port Talbot. So my background was actually in skills and technology. And then I had a most wonderful time at the University of Sheffield, where I was involved with a very, very powerful example of where you could use new skills, new technologies to develop jobs locally in Sheffield and AMRC. I also worked closely with the city councils of Sheffield, Rotherham, and also of Barnsley. So it's really great, actually, to have the people. I'll go around the screen, and I'll start with Juergen, Professor Juergen Maier, because he's somebody who's an incredibly strong supporter of the way the technology, both your experience in Siemens, but also in the study you did for the government on smart skills and manufacturing, but also now the Northern Powerhouse. Very welcome to you, Juergen. Kersten, now from Bradford again, one of my favorite places, Bradford. When I was last there, I was at the Alhambra, but also wonderful countryside and capability around it. So thank you very much, Kersten, for coming here today and talking about the perspectives you have. I'm sorry if I know all these places, but again, Doncaster. Daniel, thank you very much. Wonderful. I mean, I know really how powerful a logistics center Doncaster is, how wonderful the communications are there as well. So great you come here as the Chamber of Commerce to explain about it. And also we have Richard Brooks from Birmingham City Council who's involved then with looking at the partnerships as well through the city. So I think we have a great panel here. And what we've asked them to do is just to give a few minutes short things of their perceptions of how things are going around in that way. I hope you're ready to do that, people. So we're going to start with Juergen, if you'd lead off and blast away, Juergen.
Yeah, sure. And great to see you, Keith. And like you say, what a fabulous panel to join to give that sort of Midlands and Northern perspective of what we've just been hearing about on the research. And I mean, one of the things that clearly came through from me, from all of the previous speakers, was that we are devoid of a proper national strategy for where we go on skills. I didn't hear quite as much about industrial strategy, and given you're an industrialist, Keith, and I'm an industrialist, I'd like to take the conversation maybe just back slightly to that point, because I think almost before you can create a skill strategy, you do need to have the industrial and the technology strategy. Actually, it's technologies and it's industry, and look, Keith, you just raised where your dear father started his technology career at Port Talbot, and look, I mean, that's in the headlines at the moment. Why is it in the headlines? It's because for the last 20 years we never created a proper industrial strategy to manage the transformation of UK steel industry from a high carbon, high energy intensive industry to a lower carbon, greener industry. And of course, many other nations have had those strategies, so they are now more competitive than we are. So the UK can no longer afford to have blast furnaces, and unfortunately, we're closing it down. And so it's the absence of that sort of industrial strategy. And of course, once you create a strategy, if you do it right, and you create what are the new jobs that are going to come, then of course you need to develop what the skills strategy is. The other thing that was mentioned quite a lot in the previous panels was sort of demand strategy, and this I find very interesting. Having worked for a long time in industry in this country, but also in Germany and Austria, and we just don't have a demand-based skills strategy. And if I can just very quickly explain the Austrian model, because I actually think it's easier than the German model. In Austria, you still have a national network of job centres. That's basically what they are. But the job centres act as more than just a job centre. The job centre is the centre that is responsible for coordinating demand and supply between local employers and local skills providers. And because that is the system, and because that's the system that has existed for like 40 years, every employer knows it's their responsibility to give their demand of skills into that system once a year, and it's once a year for what is required over the next 5 years. So there is there's a map, and people know of what's going to come. And it's incredibly simple, isn't it? Why can't we do something as simple as that? And instead, we sort of, keep inventing new and fragmenting things. So, that was one thing. What can we put in place that's really very simple? And then the final point, because I've only got a couple of minutes. My final point is that, we really, really do need to prioritize apprenticeships, further education, and technology skills more. I was just looking up the statistics, and in the UK, it is now 4% of our workforce that go through a formal apprenticeship route, 4%. And actually, the number has dropped off since we introduced the apprenticeship levy. Great policy that was. And in most industrial nations, and again, whether that's France or France was mentioned in your discussions, or Germany, it's somewhere between 40 and 60% of people that go through those sorts of technology apprenticeships. And by the way, that's technology, arts, crafts.
Yeah.
It's quite a broad. And we just need to find something that is a complete reset. In terms of that, not all of the skills that are required, especially where we're going in the future, is of that, fundamental academic need. A lot of it is academic mixed with, technical skills, and actually is very much mixed with, again, what another piece of your research was talking about, and I wrote it down here, is the skills of collaboration, problem solving, and communication. So it's more of those sorts of skills, and a lot of that tends to come through, what I would call sort of apprenticeships, further education type training. So I'll leave my initial opening remarks there and look forward to the discussion.
No, thank you, Juergen. I very strongly agree with the point of view you're putting forward. Kersten, do you want to pick up some of those ideas or your own perspectives on?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, thank you, Keith. And again, great to be part of this. And actually, I had a brief encounter with the Resolution Foundation's work as part of the advisory panel. So I've had my arguments with Torsten Bell in terms of the overwhelming focus on service sector and not looking at the place of the manufacturing sector and the wider non-market sectors, although I think my experience of social care, it's been quite marketised in some senses. But anyway, that said, and I was a bit struck by the lack of looking at the whole of the UK, because if I was to look at the Centre for Cities report this week, it does show a real difference in Scottish performance of Dundee, Aberdeen, Edinburgh, Glasgow in terms of graduate pools of labour and productivity. And actually, I think we need to be more interested in England, and I say that probably as a Scot with a bit of bias, but in what is happening in Scotland, and that's not to decry the levels of deprivation. But anyway, look, I want to say a little bit about Bradford, and then some of the frustration that we continue to look at the levels of disparity that we look at, and some of the thoughts I have about the kind of policy direction that would be helpful, but then also the research questions. And the thing to think about Bradford, you mentioned the Alhambra, we're going to be city culture. Put that to one side. We're the youngest city in this country.
Wow.
We are 35% under the age of 20. We're globally connected, 150 languages spoken. We are digital natives largely, and hugely entrepreneurial. That has to be a huge asset for the growth of not just the North UK and the productivity journey. So why are we looking at such stuck statistics that show, that kind of the level of disparity that continues? Because the UK's performance on these metrics is parlous. If you to look at the north of England and Juergen and and Dan and I know this full well, we're at the bottom then, therefore, of a powerless situation. Something dramatic has to shift. And I think if you were to look at further research, looking at some of the shifts that are needed, for example, the 1.6 billion funding gap in kind of research that's directed into northern HEIs that are hugely capable of being part of the future, have great capabilities, but the Golden Triangle continues to hoover up the bulk of the research, and the impact of that then is lessened and so on. But there are other absolute disparities. And look, I know how hard local authorities, combined authorities, chambers of commerce, colleges, universities are now working across the north, actually, but certainly I have most experience of Leeds City region on employment skills strategies, trying to give young people experience of the workplace around all the occupations that are possible. You know, we're trying to flex the apprentice levy, so we pool it and share it, but these are workarounds. The curriculums don't exist. The structures for the apprentice levy is not good. You know, I know University of Bradford, #1 in the country for social mobility, produces more graduates that go into higher professional or entrepreneurial destinations than anywhere else in the north of England. And more postgraduate students studying AI. You know, and there are many other assets for this productivity thing. But it's precarity, which I think was mentioned first up, wasn't it, in the Resolution Foundation, with a lack of strategic framework. Juergen's referred to a funding model that's broken. Look, I was talking to a vice chancellor who said they've lost 1,000 students due to the visa changes. And you know, the universities at the moment are hugely dependent on international income because the fee hasn't been lifted, because the fee structure isn't working. And so you've got an immediate, you know, kind of constant shifting, fluctuating fees, local authorities that are looking at bankruptcy. I mean, and maybe Richard wants to say something of it. It's not bankruptcy as such, but huge precarity in their finances and devolution, which is really decentralisation, with some notable exceptions. And that said, we're maxing out on what we can do. So completely agree, Juergen, around the strategy, employment skills, and the transport investment, because again, on the research it's talked about Birmingham and the transport system. You know, Bradford is the 5th biggest city in England, and it's not on a national rail connection. You shunt in and out. So that's why we've made such a big case around connectivity. But I have to mention, you know, before you even get off the ground on any of these agendas we've talked about, fiscal reform, business rates, council tax, revenue raising powers, flexibilities, devolution, proper devolution to unlock the potential of sub-regional systems got to happen. Something we haven't mentioned, I just feel I should mention, is the early years system, which has been desiccated. And actually, if you don't get children by the age of 7, actually equipped with some of these basic skills around communication, collaboration, interaction with others, and there's been huge underinvestment over the last 10 years, they are not going to learn through the school system. Innovation in the school curriculum is absolutely not fit for purpose. It takes forever. The regulatory bodies are slow to then recognise and accredit new forms of qualification. Huge amount to do around all of that. I'd also I'm the chair of the Young Foundation, which of course does huge amounts of research around community, but the need to reinvest in the hyper-local and the pathways into employment for those furthest from the labour market, if we are really going to tackle regional disparities. Doesn't get a lot of attention, but this is a whole system solution that is absolutely needed. And then the inclusive growth dimension of the new economy just needs, as I say, who benefits from technological change and innovation in this. So very quickly, I was going to turn to how research can aid. I think it's crucial. I'm director of the Yorkshire Policy Engagement Research Network, which is systematically building relationship between universities and the local and combined authorities, and defining research agendas and connecting them to policy development and investment decisions. Should we be successful, watch the space for Yorkshire Policy Innovation Partnership, which is specific. It's £5 million to invest in looking at inclusive growth, transition to a green economy, living sustainability. So we are building locally active research systems at regional and sub-regional level. I also directed the Bradford, Better Start Bradford and Born in Bradford kind of research programs. I think they're incredibly important, but the really important thing is learning to speak each other's languages, building a shared infrastructure for research that we all understand, and linking it to the process of policy development and innovation. And finally, I think you wanted, in terms of further areas of research, I've got 3, which actually I think were all mentioned already, but I do think this thing about rapid curriculum innovation, I was struck by that statistic about how little teaching is being transformed by technology at the moment, when I know, what's the figure? 60% of kids are now using ChatGPT, right, for their studies. Actually, there's a real need to look at the education system and how young people are learning and the skills that teachers have, and also moving. I remember my daughter did art in university and social media. She knew much more than any of the lecturers at her university, which is good university. It's well rated for the degree she did, but just they were educating the educators. So let's start to flip these things around, co-produce curriculum systems and get regulatory bodies. First thing. Second thing, desperately need to look at managerial organizational culture in this country. Could not agree more. Mastering control, empowerment, democratization of the workplace. The tech is going to reduce the demand for managerialism. Let's make sure it empowers people within a kind of acceptable framework. And the final thing, again, it was mentioned, is flexibility in the employment contract. I mean, that 4-day week for productivity, the dramatic difference that would make for women in the workplace, well, women and men, but can I just say it's usually women who still bear the cost of childcare. And it's a huge constraint, childcare sufficiency at the moment and the cost of sufficiency. But not just that, the contract that, renegotiating the contract that might allow people to come in and out of the workforce with an employer, but bringing new knowledge and skills and actually acknowledges the wider skills. Now, some of the big 4, we just brought PwC in to have a growth hub in Bradford, as they do in Belfast, and they're working really hard at understanding these trends and implementing them. So those things. For me, there's also something which is little talked about the informal economy. It's huge in some of our big cities. And we don't understand it. We don't understand how cash is being, how wealth is being created and distributed. But when you have huge amounts of cash brought into the banking system, it would be good to understand the skills mix of what's going on in that economy and how we might capture some of that entrepreneurialism.
Thank you.
I can say more, but I'd leave it there.
Thank you very much, Kersten. And Richard from Birmingham.
Thank you very much. I mean, I suppose I'd just make 3 points, each fairly briefly. So I'm the director responsible for strategy at Birmingham, but I'm also responsible for a load of other things, as is the way in local government, including our cost of living response, our digital and technology services, and a whole load of our kind of corporate enabling services. And I suppose it's worth just reflecting to people, what it's like at the moment in the sector. And what it's like being in a big local authority, which is in intervention and financial distress. And I suppose the key thing to say is there is just a huge contrast at the moment between the opportunities of the city and the capacity of the local authority to respond to them. A couple of years ago, when we weren't facing quite the same challenges, there was just an enormous field of opportunity, I thought, for us to make better use of data, better use of research, to engage with our partners more effectively, to tackle some of the complex issues across the city. And a lot of those opportunities are still there, but the capacity of the organisation to take those opportunities is now just hugely under pressure. And I'm absolutely certain that it's the same across whole chunks of our country at the moment. Our local authorities and other parts of governments, actually, and that is just that feels awful. That feels
it's
really
the same,
awful.
Richard. It's the same thing with the university further education colleges as well. They're very pressed again for the reasons that Kersten said. But anyway, do go on.
So you've got so there's a city, and I'm sure Bradford and lots of other cities are in the same situation, where you've got these kind of hotspots of opportunity, where you can see what needs to be done actually to take advantage, to create innovation, to create jobs and wealth, and the public authorities are just hugely constrained from being able to
it's a very important point.
So I guess two slightly more positive things. One is the kind of research that we've been discussing today, I think, is phenomenally important. And people mustn't think that just because there are these kind of tectonic plates of finance and intervention sort of moving, it's not important. I think it's phenomenally important. Things like the Resolution Foundation report that we were talking about earlier, which Birmingham participated in, really important and important at lots of different levels. And I suppose lots of people here will concentrate on the kind of technical, the data, the insight, but I just wanted to draw attention to the fact that actually the kind of top level messaging that is important for politicians and public discourse is equally important. So it's really easy in local political environments for the debate to be about how important, the suburbs are and the less sort of well-served areas of the city as well as the city centre. And although manufacturing is, of course, important, it's really easy to be nostalgic, especially in a place like Birmingham or, other places where you've got incredibly strong history. Whereas actually, when you look at the really hot opportunities now, they're in a range of sectors, and certainly, high-tech manufacturing is not actually the main opportunity for us in Birmingham. And so just getting across some of that messaging, you've got to invest in your city centre, you've got to lean into your strengths.
It's a wonderful city centre, actually. I mean, I think the work that the city did in transforming the city is fabulous, right? I mean, it is a wonderful place.
It's a fab city and that's why we've got loads of people relocating business to us. And you've got, Arup and PwC and HSBC, Goldman Sachs moving into the city. It's crazy, but that's the city centre, and it's a 1.2 million person city. So, so research really important, and the multi levels of its impact I just wanted to draw attention to. And then thirdly, the importance of supporting the kind of local data and innovation ecosystem. So we've set up a Birmingham City Observatory in the past couple of years, and some of the innovation that is helping to drive is partly there's a sort of research side of it, but there's also things like by creating the capability to use census data at the local level effectively and to make it available to people, we're allowing, for example, our local colleges, further education colleges, to predict the nature of local demand. Local supply of, it's demand in a certain sense, but local supply of young people from different areas of the city, of different ethnicities, with different socioeconomic backgrounds, and then to plan outreach courses that meet them in an incredibly granular level, down to output area level.
Wonderful.
And that kind of ecosystem, I think, is still one that that local authorities can support, and that the people in this workshop and seminar I'm encouraged to reach out to. But just looking back to my first point and then finishing, just conscious that at the moment the capacity to respond is difficult. Anyway, I'll stop there.
No, very important point. Thank you, Richard. Daniel, go back to Doncaster now.
Hi, Keith. Thank you for inviting me. Just by way of intro for colleagues on the call, I'm Dan Fell. I'm the Chief Executive of Doncaster Chamber of Commerce, an organisation that supports and represents the business community. I'm privileged to do a range of other non-exec and voluntary roles linked to economic development in South Yorkshire, which in recent years has included chairing a successful project to open a university technical college in Doncaster, which has been a runaway success, actually. Evidences the need for diversity and choice in our education system. And another role I've been very privileged to do for 5 years is chair of Cast Theatre in Doncaster. And I'm sort of really passionate about the role of arts in education. And perhaps that might come up in the conversation a little bit later on. However, I think the reason I'm here is because Doncaster Chamber leads on something called Local Skills Improvement Plans in South Yorkshire. Local Skills Improvement Plans, the essential hypothesis and not dissimilar to what Juergen was describing in Austria earlier, is to put skills planning a bit closer to the private sector by moving it to bodies like us, employer representation entities. I'll confess I'm slightly agnostic about the policy. I'm not sure that we're any better or worse than people who've gone before us at holding the pen on sort of authoring those plans. But what I do think we've been able to be is 2 or 3 things that are quite critical. Firstly, we've been good compilers of evidence for our public sector partners in South Yorkshire, and we've got elegant partnerships where we can sort of dock that in well to organisations like our Maier Combined Authority, the FE sector, higher education institutions. I think we know to tilt in some sort of thought leadership and some good, innovative ideas from industry and the private sector about how we might create a stable skills system, but that's got the agility and dynamism in it that sort of employers covet. And I think we've also been as players sort of a really good convening role to get our system aligned and working well. And it feels like we're actually achieving that in South Yorkshire at the moment. That LSIP produced a raft of recommendations of all these reports do. 4 things I just want to highlight as sort of themes from that. 2 to sort of make us sort of put our head in our hands. 2 to give us actual reasons for sort of optimism and that. The ones that sort of worry me a little bit more are, I should be careful I say this, bearing in mind the community of interest I represent, but we measure on digital skills, and there's a real lack of imagination about how employers were responding to that in terms of sort of game-changing technology and the opportunities there. And I'm afraid I had far too many survey responses back telling me about kind of basic IT skills and so forth, which was a bit sort of bit worrying. And it also highlighted a lack of attention that we play to middle management in our skills systems. We talk quite a lot about leadership, we talk quite a lot about entry-level jobs, but there's a fundamental point that people leave bad managers more often than they leave bad organizations. So there are 2 things I think sort of worry me a little. More reasons to be cheerful, 2 things. Actually, I got a real sense that we talk down our skills system far too much. We're a bit deficit-based to this conversation. There's a lot of good things going on that employers are responding well to. And also, I was really heartened by how sort of liberally and laterally employers are thinking about where talent came from in our communities in a really meritocratic way. The challenge is often just that last mile support that connects kind of hidden talent to hidden careers in our system. Conscious of time, so just my sort of final points. We've got loads of exciting growth sectors in South Yorkshire, advanced manufacturing, which you will know well, Keith, green mobility and so forth. But we also have risks. That sort of logistics, warehousing stuff you talked about in a place like Doncaster means we've got double the national average of jobs at risk of automation. So that's a huge thing we have to wrestle with here. One thing I don't think has yet come out in our conversations today is just the micro and SME nature of our economy. 90% plus of our businesses employ 10 or fewer people. So whilst I'm relatively optimistic for the future, if we get our head round proper industrial strategy, maximise kind of skills devolution opportunities, we have an uptick in employer investment, that will only work if we think deeply about real worlding our policies and plans in the context of a micro and SME economy.
Well, thank you very much. We've gone around. I'm going to pick up on a couple of the points that have been made, and then we'll go to some questions from outside. I mean, first thing we come back to, I think, is the idea of, we talk about skills, but actually I think the bit that Chris Pissarides was talking about is the culture in terms of how training goes on. And, I've been talking about that since my father, again, talked about it when he talked about investment in skills at middle management level. And I do think that's right. That's a very, very powerful issue throughout British culture, in fact. But what it comes back to, I think, in some ways, is what you were saying, Daniel, about how you have the diverse set of training that's needed. We do have a kind of sort of monolithic higher education system that's tuned to particular needs, particular conceptions of what middle-class parents want, in a sense, things of that sort. Whereas the adaptive needs, which local communities can have, local business communities, are very much lacking. Now, what I've seen personally in local authorities, comes back to what Richard said, is a lot of interest and understanding. But I think that if you're going to do that, you do need much more substantial devolution and much more money associated with devolution as well. So if you look at the local partnership deal that went to South Yorkshire, for example, very welcome, but in my mind, still tiny compared to what the needs would be. And what, say, Daniel, people have spent. I don't know if people want to comment. So I think actually, if you're going to have adaptation to the local needs, to industry and things like that, you're going to need more money in terms of local voices. I don't know if you would agree with that, Juergen, being running the Northern Powerhouse.
No, I mean, look, you're absolutely right. So, I mean, I was really struck by what Richard said about, there's so much more opportunity than there is capacity to deliver. And actually part of the capacity is to help, especially those micro businesses that Daniel was talking about, and when I led the Made Smarter review that you referred to earlier, which was all about looking at, why is it that, especially those sorts of small to medium-sized micro businesses, why are they not investing more and getting themselves ready more for digital IT, and therefore why are they not investing in the skills of their people? A lot of it did come down to leadership, management, I suppose it's sort of vision. A lot of people were just, they're sort of so in the busy mode of getting their output out, doing what they're doing. They're not thinking ahead. But actually, you can put mechanisms in place that support those businesses. And indeed, Made Smarter was one of those policies where there is a leadership program, a mentoring program. People get sort of easy, ready-made technology packages that they can apply in their organizations. And the problem is as exactly as Richard said, there is not the capacity to really roll those out and deliver those and help them. And maybe just one final comment on that capacity. I took a group of civil servants and local authorities to Leipzig in Germany. It was a long time ago now, about 10 years ago when I was still at Siemens, because I wanted to show them how some of what we're talking about works in Leipzig. And then they were talking about all these things they're doing, how they're helping their SME micro businesses. And then one of the British people said, but, how do you get the money for all of these? And when you do bids and you need to, and you get rejected. And at the other end, these people were just looking blank. They were saying, what do you mean bids? So no. I mean, we always struggle to spend the money we get allocated. And there was just a completely different, this recognition that you do have to put money, particularly into the devolved regions, so that they can help their economies grow. And we're doing exactly the opposite, right?
I'm going to follow on with that, if you don't mind, because I do think this devolution issue is critical in terms of local capability. Because Kersten, you mentioned Scotland, and so I'm quite involved actually with the manufacturing capability in Glasgow, and their particular growth has been in photonics. So actually, the growth of the laser industry, optics, whether it's used for imaging or actually communications. In fact, the lasers in Glasgow, but in Glasgow, do the machining of the phones you've probably got. They actually then, the machines are taken to China and actually machine a lot of the frames for iPhones. So I'm just saying it's possible there in Glasgow, as they've done with the Scottish government, to drive a very, very large, new, exciting new sector of technology. And I just say, what things you've seen in Bradford, for example, in terms of your opportunities and devolution. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I want to say one thing, which is I'm very aware that the messages from Labour is there's very little room for manoeuvre. The fiscal situation is so I think it's really important to keep emphasising the fact that there is much needed fiscal reform to give stability to the local systems, whether combined authorities or local authorities.
So it goes back to Richard again, isn't it?
Well, we're 4 years past the fair funding review, the business rates reset, which actually properly values the value that businesses, are creating and therefore can contribute. Even a penny of national insurance coming to local systems to invest in infrastructure training would make a huge difference. So it's a combination of reform, redistribution, and avoiding, as Juergen says, abortive costs of bidding for. I think we spent 300 grand bidding for the Levelling Up Fund only to be told we were ineligible because we've got money in the first round. It's ridiculous, that sort of situation. So there are absolute clusters. Again, Bradford has a higher than the national average amount of manufacturing, its history, but I don't want to be nostalgic about this. What we've got is emerging strengths in electronics engineering, aerospace, RF, radio frequency clusters, actually, and aerospace related, which is going to be incredibly important in the kind of geopolitical situation, cybersecurity and so on. So proper devolution, not decentralisation to West Yorkshire would enable proper sustained investment in that. We just need kind of consistent direction of travel, long-term funding agreements, accepting there's not masses of extra money, but where the flexibilities can be given to us, not earned autonomy. So, if you were to see some of the negotiations that go on around spending small amounts of money, you would be horrified at this. So,
Kersten, follow up on that, because, I mean, if we believe, which I do actually, that in fact it is possible to spend very effectively in terms of future investment in local things. I mean, Richard's talked about the opportunities. What what should researchers be doing to show the importance of that, or actually effectiveness of that? What would be good? Richard, do you have a view on that? You've got a juicy project that we could show actually delivers stuff to the UK economy better. You know, just an example. You don't have to have it, but if you do, it'd be great. We'll nick it.
I have one example. It's not related to the economy. Richard, did you want to come in? I'll stop.
Slightly glib comment, right? But most of the people on this call know what needs to be done.
Yeah.
The government and the Treasury will not do it.
Yeah.
So we need to keep on banging away at, some of the things that would embarrass people into, with a barrage of evidence and argument and, clever articulation about what they need to do.
Yeah.
I'd be tied up in negotiations over bootling aspects of funding when we've got, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of funding streams coming into one organisation.
Yeah.
Every one of them has got...
That's a very important point. Daniel, do you want to come back on that? Sorry, Kirsten. Daniel?
It's all right, it's fine.
Yeah, I can only concur with colleagues about the ridiculous abortive effort that goes into these competitive bids, where often we're pitting our economies against each other for resource, which is ridiculous. But it's not just the abortive effort that's the problem. It's the inability to then know what tools you've got in your kit so you can act strategically as a place, when you've got tiny little piecemeal bits of resource coming in. Yeah. So that's one issue. The other issue I'd highlight is there's a lack of consistency from the centre in terms of its response to devolution. So on the topic of the skills and people that we're talking about today, I remember when South Yorkshire put its original devolution bid in, and now hands up, South Yorkshire made a bit of a cock-up of that because we then started to snatch a bit of defeat from the jaws of victory by fighting amongst ourselves for a few years. But that's not the point I'm making today. The point is that we sort of put skills asks in. We understood our end-to-end skills system really well locally, and we put asks in to departments that then were BIS, business and industrial strategy, Department for Work and Pensions, and DFE, and we got as a region 3 very different responses back from the centre. We got pretty much everything we asked for from BIS, a few crumbs off the table from DWP, and an absolute drawbridge up from DFE on this. So if we're going to do sort of skills devolution, we've got to do a proper job. Yeah. But it's incumbent on us as places not just to moan at government about that. When we do get those opportunities, we have to do them well, and we have to have a greater appetite for risk and more trust in ourselves than I think we do currently. So I think we've got to look in the mirror about what we can do better ourselves, not just moan and groan at the centre.
Good. Thank you. So we're going to move over and then, Emily, back to the outside world. Well,
thank you very much, Keith, and thank you to the panel. You've stimulated a lot of questions and thoughts from all the participants, so thank you. And I've only got time to touch on a few of them, but a lot of them have been around devolution, as you would expect. I'd like to take one that's got a slightly different angle. It was mentioned about the decline in the number of apprenticeships, particularly for young people over recent years since the levy. But I know at the same time that there are examples of really fantastic opportunities in some areas. I wondered if any of you had some examples that you could give from your own areas where employers are offering apprenticeships and they're providing that kind of ladder of opportunity, and what might we learn from those across the country and UK as a whole?
Anyone want to go on that? Kirsten?
I'm happy to come in if no one else is. So I think one of the things that we've done is to step into the apprentice system, which is like the local authority and employers and the colleges. So, for example, taking the transactional overhead cost of managing apprentices, particularly if you've got small and medium enterprise. To Dan's point, the vast majority of companies in Bradford haven't got the kind of bandwidth to be able to manage the apprenticeship system effectively. So if you we have a skills house which is working both with young people entering the labour market and those furthest from the labour market, and trying to tailor and adapt. Also for certain sectors like the cultural sector, almost impossible to actually have proper apprenticeships, but negotiating with colleges around development of curriculum, things that can be accredited. We've done quite a lot of that, and we've backed that up with, we haven't gone down the route of UTCs, but we have industrial centres of excellence led by employers against each of the growing sectors of the economy, which are 14 to 19 experiences of the world of work, working with schools, young people and the employer, that then leads into a curriculum pathway and often into apprenticeships. And also maxing out and graduate apprenticeships has been really important, because that kind of continuous development of the workforce as we've said, has been the focus on that's been diminishing. And when I look back to the days of Investors in People, almost with a rosy glow, and it wasn't perfect as a system, but how many people really pursue anything of that nature anymore? So a few thoughts there.
Richard's going to come here.
Can I make a quick policy point here, which is, so there is a policy problem that we could solve tomorrow about apprenticeships, which is that the apprenticeship levy, if it's underspent, gets clawed back by the Treasury. And you've got loads of organisations, including loads of public sector organisations, that underspend their apprenticeship levy.
That's right.
Treasury has, who cares, right? They love getting the money back. We could ring fence that money to local apprenticeships provision.
Yeah.
Other organisations.
Oh, sorry, Richard, I spoke earlier there. But just given I had raised this point, just very quickly, there are lots of local good examples going on, and Kersten mentioned, one of your colleges, you mentioned UTCs. I can talk in Greater Manchester what some of the further education colleges are doing here. So there is local excellence. The problem is that's also our problem, because in the lack of a national framework, everybody sort of makes it up locally.
Yeah.
And what we need is a national framework that employers can understand, and then leave the local, devolved powers to implement with excellence, rather than coming up with lots of different structures and different frameworks. So, so it is, we need that national framework, and then leave it to locals to actually deliver it.
I agree.
And then I think my last question to you, slightly provocative perhaps, is where would you land in terms of, do we need some different systems structurally in national government? Like, do we need a Ministry of Work, as a question put forward from Andrew Webster, or is it more about how you operate at local level and how devolution is organised?
Happy to come in on this. I'm quite ambivalent about what we sort of call the various ministries or how we organise ourselves. I think that's not, it's important, but it's not the crux of the issue. However we organise ourselves, though, we must leave things alone. Like, we have absolute initiative-itis in this country, particularly on skills policy. Get it right and then don't touch it for 10 years. That's the key thing with this, because it is so hard to sort of constantly reconfigure, and the short-termism is absolutely crippling the economy. So don't mind what you call it, but get it right and don't touch it for a decade.
Yeah. Well, shall I wrap up?
Yes, I think we will wrap up.
Can I just come in quickly on?
Go ahead, Richard. Yeah, sure.
So I think it is less about structures and more about incentives. Where are the incentives for the major institutions to prioritise these sorts of issues? DWP doesn't have them. Local authorities have very weak incentives in this area, very weak, virtually no statutory duties. Colleges, of course, have their own incentive. Providers have their own incentives, but they are very particular. I think there's a critical lack of incentives in this area.
It's true. Yeah, when at Sheffield Sheffield University, we set up an apprentice training centre with AMRC. I was asked by Tim Melville-Ross, the head of HEFCE, why did you set this up? You had no advantage. There was no incentive to do it. I said, well, maybe it was the right thing to do. And I think that's actually the other thing. We have to think, do we understand what the right thing to do? Do we have the discretion to do them? That's what you said. Okay.